Hi, I just got back from Vid Summit in Dallas, where content creators get together and swap ideas, recharge their batteries, and talk about the professional business of content creation. Despite being around all these TikTokers and YouTubers, I did resist the urge to dye my hair purple. Aesthetics aside, one topic that did come up a lot was that of copyright infringement and this subject of fair use. When is it okay to borrow someone else's music or video and to incorporate it into your own creative content? In this video, I want to talk about this subject of fair use. What is fair use? When is it okay to use someone else's content? What you can and can't do legally, and I want to talk about 4 factors to think about and consider when using content of others to incorporate into your own content. And then finally, I'll tell you what 2 factors I look at, the 2 bright line tests that I apply to my own content when using other people's copyrighted work. Hi, my name is Carr Ferrell. I'm an intellectual property and patent attorney and content creator for you in Silicon Valley. Welcome back to my channel. So what is fair use? Well, fair use is a legal doctrine that allows the use of copyrighted work without permission for limited purposes, such as parody, criticism, news reporting, and the like. Fair use isn't a right, it's not permission. It's a defense to the claim of copyright infringement. It's an excuse. We call this an affirmative defense. If you get sued for copyright infringement, the fair use doctrine is your affirmative excuse for having committed the copyright infringement itself. The doctrine of fair use is closely tied to the First Amendment constitutional right of free speech. When raising the fair use defense, what you're saying is, I have my own opinion, I have my own speech that I want to express about the copyrighted work. For example, the copyright owner's work offends me, and I want to have the opportunity for my voice to be heard. I want to be able to comment on the copyrighted speech. And of course, the only way for me to criticize that copyrighted speech is to reproduce part of the speech so the proper context can be laid. But my constitutional free speech argument only provides for the limited use of the copyrighted material. I can't reproduce the whole thing unless it's absolutely necessary for the purposes of my free speech argument. So let's give some examples of when fair use might be a thing and when fair use would be inappropriate. For example, I'm restreaming on my channel Monday Night Football, and while the game is playing, I'm providing my own overlay commentary. That's not fair use. However, if the color commentator says something really stupid, then I'm allowed to play that stupid clip and give my commentary, give my explanation of how I think that comment should have been reframed. Another example is if I'm walking through an art gallery with my smartphone and I'm photographing or filming my travels through the art gallery, and I stop at each painting and I read the title card on each painting before going on to the next painting. This probably is not fair use because I'm reproducing these paintings without really adding my own criticism or commentary. But let's say instead, rather than me being someone who's just walking through an art gallery and taking a film or video of every single painting that I come across, I'm actually an art historian or professor of art. And there's 1 or 2 or 3 of the art pieces that I'm really interested in commenting on or explaining. In this case, it probably would be fair use for me to photograph or film several of the art pieces with my explanation and criticism of the piece. And one issue that comes up a lot in content creation for YouTube and for TikTok and Instagram, it's almost never fair use to use copyrighted music as background for your videos. And the reason for this is that the music itself was created for entertainment. And all you're doing is using that same music for entertainment purposes as background to your video. Okay, with those examples, let's take a look at the 4 criteria that courts use when determining whether fair use applies as an excuse for copyright infringement. It's important to understand that these 4 criteria are not bright line tests, but rather they're factors that get weighed together. They get measured against the specific facts of the infringement and the copyrighted work to make a determination whether fair use should apply. Okay, the 4 factors used in weighing the affirmative defense of fair use are these. The first is the purpose and character of the use. Courts look at why and how the copyrighted work was used. Specifically, they look at whether the use of the work was transformative. This concept of transformative use is super important in the doctrine of fair use. And it's a judge-made definition. A transformative use is one that adds new expression, meaning or message to the original, serving a different purpose from the original work. For example, let's say I'm starting with a video clip from a famous movie, and I'm making a YouTube video on cinematography. As part of my explanation of the video clip, I show the clip and talk about the use of colors, the positioning of elements within that clip. I might talk about how the scene fades in and fades out, and how characters move across the screen in the clip. What I have done with the use of this commercial video clip is I've broken it down and I'm using it now for educational purposes. There's a transformative use of the work from commercial to educational. Another example is there might be a political commercial that's been produced and paid for by a political candidate. I might have a differing view on the issues that are being raised by that candidate, and I take part of that video commercial and I put it on my own commercial and talk about the commentary or criticize the commentary in that original video. Both of these uses of a commercial copyrighted work are transformative uses. One from commercial use to educational use, and the second from commercial use to political criticism or commentary. Both of these transformative uses would weigh in favor of a finding of the defense of fair use. Again, free speech is in tension with the right of copyright owners in the use of their works. A second factor that's considered in the balancing in the determination of fair use is the nature of the work. Is the work a work of fiction, or is it a work of nonfiction, of fact? Fictional work carries more protection under the copyright laws than does non-fictional work. Facts cannot be copyrighted, but the organization or the expression of those facts can be copyrighted. So for this reason, we often see the re-reporting of news, at least in snippets, from copyrighted sources. A third factor in balancing and determining whether the use of a copyrighted work is a fair use is the amount and substantiality of the copied work that's being used. Using small clips of a work is better than using substantial amounts of the work. But still, if you're using the heart of the work, that is the most important part, that still could weigh against the determination of fair use. The fourth factor assesses whether the use of the copyrighted work harms the potential market for the copyrighted work. If the use substitutes for or reduces the market for the original copyrighted work, this weighs heavily against a finding of fair use. Transformative uses that serve a different market or a different purpose are less likely to harm the original market. For example, a parody of a song that mocks the original song is unlikely to substitute for the song. However, an unauthorized cover of the song is more likely to harm the market for the original. Now, when I make my own videos, I have a two-part bright line test for using copyrighted works in my own videos. My first test is to assure myself that my use of the copyrighted work is transformative, that I'm not using music for background music, but that I'm taking content. If I need the content, I take the content and I'm using it for educational purposes. Some examples of this is I've made some videos on the law of tattoos and the law of street photography and the law of performing music, for example. And I've used copyrighted contents, snippets of copyrighted contents, in order to discuss a legal point that I was trying to make. The second bright line test for me is to use as little of the copyrighted work as possible. If I'm making a transformative use of someone else's video clip, I'll try never to use more than 2 or 3 seconds of it in my video. Okay, so what are the street law takeaways for the fair use of copyrighted work? Well, first of all, and perhaps most important, is to make sure that you're using only the amount of work necessary to make your point. Second of all, make sure that your use of the work is transformative, that you're using it for a different purpose or for a different reason than it was originally intended or created. Although not required for fair use, I think it's a good practice to give attribution to the original author when possible. When in doubt about whether your use is a fair use or not, get a license to the work or get permission to use the work. And if you are a content creator, just keep in mind that public government-owned work is free for you to use without copyright, without permission, and without license. Okay, that's all I have to say today about copyright and fair use. It's a super interesting area, and I think there still is a lot of misunderstanding and confusion around it, especially among creators. If you have comments or questions about copyright, fair use, or anything else related to intellectual property, put it in the comments section below. We'd love to read your thoughts and comments and questions. I'll see you on the next video.